Welcome back. I trust that you're enjoying the first few chapters of David Copperfield, which contain some of Dickens's finest writing. Who drowned and who didn't? Well, according to Dan Peggotty, the fathers of both Ham and little Emily, but not the old 'un, the husband of Mrs Gummidge, who got ill and died in poverty. Both those men who died were fishermen, but, like the vast majority of sailors and seafarers in the 19th century, presumably couldn't swim. But who else didn't drown? The unnamed old lady with a handbasket who won David's call in a raffle. That fetal, but not fatal, headgear was believed to protect the possessor from drowning, which it duly did, as the closest the old lady ever got to going on the water was standing on a bridge, and she died in her bed at the age of 92. Death by drowning is a common theme in Dickens's novel, and it's not the last we'll hear of it in David Copperfield. The Hungarian War of Independence still dominated international news, and the entry of Russia into the conflict on the side of the Austrian Habsburgs greatly tipped the balance in their favour, notching up victories in several important battles during the month of June. In England, the Irishman William Hamilton was arrested for firing blanks at Queen Victoria while she was out riding. If he'd killed the monarch, we certainly wouldn't be referring to the Victorian era in modern discourse. In the art world, the first exhibition by the Pre-Raphaelites was held in London, exhibiting works by Millais, Burne-Jones and Rossetti. Dickens was no fan of their style, and although art appreciation may not have been one of Dickens's great strengths, he wrote a withering critique of this Millais painting. Dickens's principal engagement during June was getting on with the story that we're now reading, and once he got over some initial difficulties, started to make good progress. His one pleasure trip out of London was a short walking tour in the Kent countryside with his artist friends John Leech and Frank Stone, incidentally tracing part of the route that young David would take a few chapters later. Dickens has sometimes been referred to as the most prolific name giver since Adam, and he did indeed coin hundreds of names, which he bestowed on the creations of his mind. In order to avoid any threat of libel from actual name bearers, he tended to produce names that looked realistic enough, but were not to be found in the name stock of the English-speaking world. In the early chapters we encounter Peggotty, Trotwood, Barkis and Murdstone, which are all names of this type. Not existing, but believable. It was Dickens's genius to fit these names and the characters who bear them together, creating what are known as apteronyms, appropriate or speaking names. This is most obvious in the case of Murdstone, and Betsy Trotwood even comments that he sounds like a murderer who has a heart of stone. Aunt Betsy also has a low opinion of the name Peggotty, which she initially takes to be a most unchristian, or pagan, Christian name. The awkward sounding surname nonetheless contains the element Peg, a useful tool that holds things together, as Clara Peggotty does with the Copperfield family and Dan Peggotty with his extended family, while both Peggotty and Barkis suggest the solidity of wood, and the gruff Barkis, who drives a wooden cart, certainly has a rough exterior. The wood in Betsy Trotwood also suggests solidity and even rigidity, but the trot element evokes her brisk, no-nonsense manner. Losing it on top? Then what you need, ladies and gentlemen, is one of Ross & Son's invisible ventilating heads of hair. Truly invisible, as there's no sign of them in the ad. Just measure your bald pate round the head, ear to ear, forehead to poll, in inches and eighths, and send away with a remittance of £1.50 to receive, in return, an inimitable work of art. I wonder if their products were any better than the Salem House senior master, Mr Sharp's ill-fitting wig, poking out from under which could plainly be seen his own red hair. Why is it that wigs are such a perennial source of amusement? The two plates accompanying this part both relate to incidents in chapter 5, which recounts David's journey from the Norfolk-Suffolk border to Salem House School in Blackheath, London. The first depicts the comic set piece of the diminutive and credulous David being swindled out of his dinner and a ninepence tip by the over-friendly and very well-fed waiter. The second plate takes us inside the humble dwelling, an almshouse near London Bridge, of two old women, Mr Mell's mother and Mrs Phibbertson, where Mr Mell and David stop off en route to Blackheath. Mr Mell is prevailed upon by his deluded mother to entertain them with his musical skill. The master put his hand underneath the skirts of his coat and brought out his flute in 3 pieces, which he screwed together and began immediately to play. My impression is, after many years of consideration, that there never can have been anybody in the world who played worse. He made the most dismal sounds I have heard produced by any means, natural or artificial. I don't know what the tunes were, if there were any such things in the performance at all, which I doubt, but the influence of the strain upon me was, first, to make me think of all my sorrows until I could hardly keep my tears back, then to take away my appetite, and lastly to make me so sleepy that I couldn't keep my eyes open. Phiz's attention to detail is quite brilliant in this plate, perfectly illuminating the text. The rapt attention of the mother, Mrs Phibbertson absorbing all the warmth from the fire, the 3 drooping peacock's feathers above the mantelpiece, and little David nodding off to Mr Mell's wretched tootlings. A simple parting question this week. What was the fate of Mr Top Sawyer? Cheers!